everyone, this is Chawan recording in May 2023. After finishing the first season of the Conductor's podcast, I have decided to give this podcast project a dedicated website with more user friendly functions. So now we have a brand new website called theconductorspodcast.com. Straightforward, right? And now we also have its own Instagram handle. It's also the same, the Conductor's Podcast. Um, so all the show notes have been moved to the new site, and I invite you to come check out all the resources and happy listening.
I think creativity shows the best of humans. And when you look at happy societies, settled societies, they're in a place where they can tell stories and they can make beautiful things and they have time to enjoy these beautiful things.
Hello, and welcome back to episode number 58 of the Conductor's Podcast. Fall is my favorite season, and I hope your September has been great. If the trees and leaves in your area have started changing colors, turning into yellow, green, not green, yellow, orange, or red, make sure that you take some time to even just look out of your window or to take a walk. I always love breathing that fall colors into my lungs, and that warm color palette always cheers me up. And I just wanted to share that excitement with you. And I'm so happy that you're joining me today because I have a very special guest, Gabriela Lena Frank. I did not know her personally until during the pandemic because of course I've always known about her, but I just never knew that it would be possible one day that she will be coming to my podcast. I will be talking to her. So I'm so excited. I'm a fangirl. But during the pandemic, my friends Kensho and Lena hosted the collaborative conductors webinars, and they invited Gabriela to their webinar. And I was so inspired by her talk, and I messaged her on Facebook afterwards, just briefly saying, hey, I'm a conductor and I was at the webinar today. I felt so inspired. I wanted to be in touch, and I love performing more works by you or by your composers in the Creative Academy. And she messaged me back after a few days or a few weeks, I don't remember, but then we kind of kept in loose touch. And quite some of my connections came from this way during the pandemic, and I'm really, really grateful for the pandemic for that single reason. Because normally I would be too embarrassed, too shy, or too self-conscious to even send a message to any stranger, anyone that I thought would be too big name to even bother to reply me. But, people really love making connections, meeting new people. I think most genuine people are. And we love hearing from someone who heard about us from a radio show, from a webinar, from some programs that we had been to. And it's a great compliment. And I love that. I would love for you to take the courage to message anyone that you've been admiring for a long time. Even if they don't respond to your message, that's totally okay, because you never know who you might be get connected with. And I'm not saying that in an economic way, or like I'm trying to connect with someone to get a gig, or I'm trying to connect with someone to make an appearance at somewhere. No, just genuinely praising people, be a good human being, be a good colleague, and that's something that is wonderful. So I already told you my guest today is Gabriela Lena Frank, and she is currently the composer in residence with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And she is just a fabulous composer, and she is now the director. Not just now, she founded the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy and started mentoring and fostering the creativity of a lot of conductors of color in particular. And today we will be talking about creativity, composition, gender bias, of course, systematic biases and barriers, and mentorship. It's a great conversation that I can't wait for you to listen to, so let's dive in. Good morning, Gabriela. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the Conductor's podcast, and I can't wait for you to share your story and experiences with my audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here.
So before we get started, though, will you please give everybody a brief intro, just a little bit about your background and how you get to where you are right now?
Wow. Well, I turn 50 next month, so
Happy birthday.
I'll try to be brief. My name is Gabriela. I was born in Berkeley, California in the early 70s. I grew up in California and discovered composing right before my last year in high school. Although I had been musical my entire life and I was taking piano lessons with a neighborhood teacher and was exposed to La Música Andina or Andean music from Peru, which is where my mom's from, and changed my life to realize that music was something that could be a profession. And like many of us, I fell in love very hard with music and then went on to music school at Rice University and then Michigan, where I did my final doctorate. And I got that in the early 2000s. And I've been spending the last 20 years as a professional composer and sometimes pianist. Nowadays, often mentor, educator. I've always been in the concert world and resisted the impulse to go into academia for a variety of different reasons. And now looking at the second half of my life because I'm determined that I will hit 100 because I need to see how things turn out where there's been so much, as we know, change and overdue discussions of what our roles are as 21st century musicians, even in just the last few years. So I've been waiting a long time for this and I have to stick around.
That's lovely. I turned 40 earlier this year and I was feeling lucky because as a conductor, that's something you can do until your 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's the same as the composers.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I was really curious. How was the realization for you that you can be a professional composer? Because I was talking to a friend and then I told her when I wanted to be a conductor, I first thought I would be a music school teacher because that's all I knew about conductors. I didn't dream about being a gigging conductor because that was out of my life. So was that the same for you? And how did that reality turn out for you to be?
Yes, it goes back to that question of access. I mean, young people will aspire to go to the moon if they just know that that is a possibility. But how did that scenario come into their life? So I was thinking about applying to college, and this is the late 80s, and I wanted to round out my applications. As we see in the news, Mikhail Gorbachev just passed away, but he was doing all of that really pioneering work when I was in high school, and I was fascinated with how the global politics were changing. The wall was coming down in Europe, and Tiananmen Square had just happened, and so I thought I was going to study political science. I was probably on my way to law school, to be honest. I mean, I was scholastically a high achiever and loved history. I loved reading. I mean, maybe creative writing might have opened up at some point. And I had always loved music, but it was just a hobby and something that I had a special talent for in my family. I was always, quote, the musical one. And my grandmother was the musical one. Her brother was the musical one. So there were Franks that were the musical ones, but nobody went professional with it. So I figured, okay, I'll make this look better on my college application. And I saw this summer music program at something called the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, which I had never heard of. And I did the program. And this was before when it was had a different campus in a different part of town, an old Spanish building. And I remember walking into this building and my life changed almost instantly because the first sensation I had was just hearing this cacophony from the practice rooms, all this music that was just coming out. And it was so wonderful for me to behold this spectacle of young people practicing and going into a classroom where you had musical staff lines that were painted onto the chalkboard, which to me suggested some sort of permanence, some sort of culture, and to see textbooks with instead of chemistry or horrible geometry in it, it was music. And I was like, what is this? And I realized composers were living, and I realized I had a talent for this, but I also saw that I was very behind, that the children around me had been so serious about a professional life, and there were things that they could do and understand the culture, the mores. And I felt a little daunted by it, but something in me was audacious enough to think I can do this. And, there weren't obviously very many women. We're talking about the late 80s. And even beyond that, there weren't people of color that were doing this. So I declared freshman music composition major in college. And I was very lucky. I got accepted because my portfolio was so rudimentary. I was writing down music for the first time, and this was Finale 1.0. I mean, we were so in the earliest history of these engraving programs. There were no sequencing programs. There's nothing like that. So the first pieces I ever gave out were literally written down by hand on handwritten manuscript. I still have some of that stuff, and I look at it and it looks like children's music because my note heads were really round and clumsy, but like I said, I fell very hard for it. And when I look back at some of my earliest diary entries, I remember asking these questions like, how is this useful for the world? Am I going to become a snobby artist? I remember I was so worried about becoming a snobby elitist artist. That was my concern back then. And then I also felt I don't love Mahler, and that does make me a not deep composer. I love some of these Peruvian tunes better. What am I doing here? And then I love this part and I love that part. And these are still the things that I feel. I haven't changed. I still feel all the same things. I just have a middle age artist retrospective and understanding of all of that and the confidence. And it'll be many years before I would find other people wondering the same kinds of things. So I had to learn how to be quite exceptionally alone in some ways, and then to find kindred spirits and friendship in the areas that did overlap with peers and teachers. And it gave me really good coping mechanisms over the years. Now we're talking about things like mental health and fulfillment, life balance. Those were not things that were being discussed earlier, and were the kind of discussions that all of us would have benefited from the earlier days. So I'm glad I hung in there. And it's been quite a journey from that first day in a conservatory and to realize that I found my life calling, even if I didn't understand fully or at all what the life was going to mean. I just went on instinct. And I think that can be enough.
I can relate more than what you said about getting used to being alone or not fitting in. I think that's a shared experience by, I don't want to generalize it, but that's from what I heard. A lot of women and minority people of colors experience like with some parts we know we don't fit. We are not part of the mainstream, but we have to hide it or be okay with it enough to be able to continue following our dreams. Were there things that you learned that you are willing to share with my audience that can be maybe some actions that the young people can take on if they're feeling frustrated and lonely and not understood, not seen?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I'm going to have to generalize a little bit because these situations that people find themselves in when it comes to reconciling the exterior realities with their interior realities. And each situation is so different. But first of all, if possible, before you feel frustration, is already trying to find kindred spirits, is be into people. Don't just do your thing. Like get coffee with people or go to concerts, hang out, and just try and find the people that you don't even have to be able to articulate to yourself why, like make an argument to yourself why this is somebody you should hang out with. If it just feels right and you feel like you can be yourself and you have found a fellow quester or explorer, that would be the first thing I would say, is that should be a lifelong habit, is to do that, is to try and be preventive towards the frustration and the loneliness and feeling lack of support. So it takes up an active, proactive, preventive approach. That's the first thing. Second thing, when it has already hit, again, I have to generalize a little bit because I don't have a specific scenario before me, is I would go online and try to find an online community and try to find a way to solicit advice or a sympathetic ear. Venting can be healthy as long as it doesn't turn into something that consumes you. I mean, bitterness and anger can be good. I mean, anger can be good as long as it doesn't turn into bitterness. That's what I mean to say. And they can really consume you. And we're getting to questions of mental health and not feeling isolated. Again, it's a preventive approach is really good. The internet wasn't around when I was in school, and I think for all of its dangers that we have seen, it can also be a really good way to build some community. The third thing I would look at is if there's somebody in a position of either more power or more experience that you can talk to. It could be a teacher, it could be a mentor, it could be somebody that you met briefly, but you have a good feeling about that they would have the time or the energy. For instance, if you are a young Latina woman and you meet a Latina woman composer that talks about these things and it's just a seminar, perhaps you reach out to her in social media and say you have a situation. And are they in a place right now in their life where they could give you some words of advice? I think it's okay to ask for help, but you need to be strategic about where and who. Especially if you're a person of color, you could be penalized for something like this. And it's sad, but we all have to be strategic, I think, while asking for help and getting the advice that we need. But I would really love for young musicians to start building their support system even before they think they might need it. Is just building their community. I apologize, this is so generalized, but I think this will set them up well for the specifics of any one situation. Maybe a teacher that doesn't believe in you, or something you got passed over that you know you're qualified for, or microaggressions, or I mean, there's so many things that we can look at.
Definitely. And I think having a support system is so important now because our lives are so exposed through social media. You see people announcing the greatest things that happen to their lives, and you don't see all the frustrations behind it or all the behind the scene works. And some people seem always luckier than you are.
Yes, and that's the nature of social media. You have to also regulate your time on that and try to remind yourself exactly what you just said, that generally speaking, you're getting a stream of the greatest hits. And you start normalizing that all these peaks are what everybody else is getting. And sometimes when you look at some of these opportunities, you go like, oh, that's just a rehearsal. Somebody's broadcasting that I had a rehearsal or I had a practice session and I got an award for it. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but just try and, talk to yourself, be kind to yourself. And I used to tell myself that I wasn't a late bloomer because if you look at some of the things that are in my bio, a lot of things that came to me come to people much younger now and in more abundance. But I look at and say, I'm a cultural witness during these decades. This is when things were happening. And not only that, I'm not a late bloomer, I'm an authentic bloomer. This is when things were meant to happen for me. And I have a unique package of timelines and experiences that comprise my life. So it's good to be in a community where other people are telling you that, and not just in a community of people broadcasting their greatest hits.
But I love that an authentic bloomer. I've always thought I'm a late, if not never, bloomer. But I love that. So coming back to your conservatory days, you say there were not many women back then. I believe that is still true. There are still not a whole lot of women in certain programs. We know the composition and conducting, for example, and there are some low brass and some other stereotyped instruments. How did you feel we can change that? Of course, accessibility is important, but how do we encourage young women, because there are so many talented young women instrumentalists? They might not feel confident enough to conduct or to compose. And you've been mentoring young people. Like, are there some key things that you see happening again and again from what they're telling you or told by their mentors?
Wow. I mean, we're talking about an issue that's beyond one person to resolve. And I mean, I could tell you some of the things that I have begun to do within my singular life as a composer. I don't live in the Bay Area anymore, where I'm from in Northern California. I moved a couple hours north into this rural, fire-prone small town of a little over 1,000 people. And we are working, and I established a nonprofit academy. And one of the things that my academy is working on now is working with the local school system to help boost their offerings to pre-college youth. Most of them in the public schools here are the sons and daughters of the agricultural workers, and they're mostly Latino, some may be undocumented. And to begin with a message of creativity and belief that we invest in them and we think they can do whatever they want in their life. And my composers that are much more cool than I am and younger than I am and hip with technology and don't speak in dated Gen X language the way I do, can really connect with them. And I'm sort of the abuelita that kind of walks around among them. And so I think everybody can do something to try and help a young person. And it may not even mean that they'll become professional musicians, but in a way that's not always helpful to say, well, I only want to, mentor a young person that's going to become an amazing conductor, an amazing composer. You may not find that right off the bat. You may need to just be available to a young person in need. And if they learn a musical instrument, you don't know where that's going to go. So sometimes we have to get out of our own heads about who gets to do music and on what level. And I think that's very hard for us to have gone through the conservatory when we expect to go to the Olympics. And we expect to be among people that are Olympians. I mean, the things that we can do, the way we're trained, the rhythms we can hear, the rhythms that we can clap, and the music that we understand, we're kind of superheroes. It's easy for us to forget that. So that's the first thing is cultivating a more general volunteerism effort, I think is helpful. And especially if you're just figuring this out, if you're just figuring out what can I do to address this large systemic issue, because it is very large and took generations to get to the point where music is not part of the public school system anymore. Then the second thing is there are some programs that perhaps you can contribute to. I would look at Elm in Marin County, run by Jane Kramer, Community Music Works, Play on Philly. Just start there. Look at the websites. They will point to other websites of pre-college youth programs, and they often target disadvantaged communities that often are Black and Latino, immigrants, women. I've seen something like Aaron Bush's program, Wildflower, out of Philadelphia, is women identifying composers. So we're starting to go into the gender fluid and trans communities. That's another approach. Get to see who's doing what and reach out to Aaron, reach out to others, say, can I volunteer some time to help you out? And you should get into that community. Find those kindred spirits that have the same goals as you, as wanting to help representation, and learn from them. Can you volunteer some time and learn from them? We established a program where alums from my academy live in Boonville for a few months at a time to get an artist retreat, but in return, they help me with the youth program, with whatever we're trying to do. So people are doing things, but you may have to dig a little bit, spend a few hours online to find it. Look at your own life, like what is your time like? What's your energy like? And realize that you're very needed. You're very needed. And unfortunately, the infrastructure doesn't exist to just walk in and be helpful somewhere. You may have to strategize a little bit, but that's how dire the situation is that we don't even have a good infrastructure, and we're at infrastructure building in many cases. Personally, I think this is more important for me to do than to get another fancy commission, is for me to help this younger generation get a foothold, that they need me more than my industry needs me to be a fancy, successful composer. But being that fancy, successful composer has given me leverage to not only keep growing as an artist and to keep being a badass that we know what I decided I was going to try and put my life into, but also to be of service to all of these other people that need us. They need us.
Yes, we need more fancy, successful composers like you. But as you say, that's really true, because when you say something, people listen to you. More people will listen to you. And as you said, if you are listening right now, we'll put all the initiatives that Gabriela just mentioned in the show notes. But if you just Google any program, and if you don't have time to volunteer, donate, or even just spread the word, telling others that they are great programs that their granddaughters, their daughters, their friends' daughters can look into, or even just praise a young girl for their creativity is important.
Yeah, we all can do something. And we can also, many of us, not all of us, but many of us can do more than we think. Many of us can do more than we think.
So I'm going to ask a terrible question because I
Uh-oh.
got asked a lot. People often ask me if I feel women conduct in a different style or different ways. And so I was going to ask, all right. So I'm going to phrase my question a little better. So someone in the UK, Dr. Green, had a study. She found that middle school teachers often praise female students with following rules in music competition. So they would praise the girls are good at following rules, are very organized and neat. And then they praise the boys being more creative and brave and thinking out of the box.
That's
And
so
she felt
gross.
like,
I'm sorry, that's so gross. It just makes me cringe for both the boys and the girls.
she claims that this is part of the reason why a lot of girls do not feel encouraged enough to believe that they're creative. And of course, I think she was doing great things, that she called for reformation or kind of reviews looking at their public music education system. But do you feel the same? Of course not. But like, do you feel others or like telling you, or there's some girls being discouraged by their mentors, or do you feel that, I know we are just different individuals that we create in different unique ways, but do you find any generalization between cultural backgrounds, or not going to the gender rabbit hole, that is from your academy?
Oh, I see. Well, certainly my composers have told me stories about teachers that quantified their abilities according to their gender or their race. And my feeling is like, God, still? I know this is still happening. Haven't we proven ourselves as being fully creative, ingenious, broad spectrum storytellers, that a skilled storyteller can be very finesse, they can have power, they can be blunt, they can be exquisite, and it's not dependent, biologically speaking, on our gender or our race. I think there's a great psychological impact on a young person. according to their surroundings. If they have people saying, this is what you're able to do as a young person, it's hard to unpack that. It can take a lot of years before you realize, oh, I don't just follow the rules, that I could actually break the rules and I can be creative. And it's just so hard for me to believe that people can say that with a straight face. And obviously they are. And that's infuriating. So, I remember some specific things that were said to me. Somebody once said I should have been born a man because they were hearing me play Bartok and Hinastera. And I used to, back in the day when I was playing a lot, I played a lot of big stuff like that. I couldn't do Mozart very well. I couldn't do Handel very well, Haydn, excuse me, very well. But Bartok and a lot of contemporary composers, I just loved playing. There's something about the physicality and the jumping around the keyboard like that. That was a lot of fun for me. And I couldn't believe that person said this. And this was like a good friend too. And I was like, you even know who I am. And this bias runs so deep in you that you have to say this. And this was a person of color too, a man of color. And I remember saying to him, that's like me saying, you should have been born white. Your music is so good. You play, it's just got so much goodness in it. Should have been born white. And I think then, my friend understood, but thought it was a compliment. Thought it was a compliment to tell me that I didn't play delicately like a girl. So, we all have these biases, and the biases get magnified by people in power, by institutions that set the norm. All I can say is that as much as we can remind ourselves, we have to do this. We have to remind ourselves as well as encourage others. They can do whatever they want. They can be whatever they want. They can push themselves to whatever heights they want to go. They can say no to things. They can protect their mental health. They can tell the stories they want to tell. They may need to work to get the skill sets, but they have the right. They have the right to improve. They have the right to take time to authentically bloom and to get all of that. And that's a powerful, liberating message to receive. But it can take a lot of therapy, a lot of friends telling you you're cool, some successes professionally that convince you, hey, look, these people, this crowd, these players, they committed to me as a conductor. And they committed to my music. There must be something here. I got to convince myself I belong. I can do this. So this constant kind of feedback, from good people, from the universe, and we have to keep putting ourselves out there.
I'm so sorry that even you received that kind of comment. I had someone telling me exactly the same thing. He was saying, oh, you're good. You don't conduct like a girl. And that was a compliment.
Yeah, and when you get something like that, first, your mind just goes blank. It's like you can't even believe it. And then sometimes, my mind, goes blank. And then I either laugh because I'm nervous, or I laugh because I'm not nervous at all. It's just so supremely ridiculous and it's funny. And then my mind goes immediately into, how can I connect with this person? This is a teaching moment for both of us. I want to understand why this person probably, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, is a good person that thinks this way. How does a good person think this way? Do they hate themselves? Is this coming from another woman or another person of color? There's so many layers here. And if I'm a musician and I'm all about connection and I'm into people, how deep down this ambassadorship do I want to go? Do I want to connect with this person? And there are times when it's said in a very degrading way, in which I have the confidence now not even to engage. Yeah, I just don't engage in those kinds of things. And in a weird way, there have been experiences the last 2.5 years since the protests broke out in the murder of Mr. George Floyd, and our industry started really looking at itself, where some people were more careful about my heritage, and then others were uglier about it in some ways. And I had some very strange experiences. One where I declined a commission offer from an organization with mostly white dudes and at the helm of the directorship. The primary guy we worked with, my agent and I, was lovely. He was just great. And we tried to make it work, but didn't quite work out. And I said, look, let's try again in the future. When the gods are in alignment better, it's just not going to work out this time. But his colleague came back the next day and lectured me. And this just happened in the last couple of years. And said, this would have been really good for you. And our values are in alignment. I got mansplained and wife-blamed. Couldn't believe it. That had never happened before. And so guy number one was horrified, and he came back and he apologized. And you could tell this was an organization that had a messy house. I call it a messy house. When the admin there's some strife going on. And it's kind of like when you're the guest that shows up for dinner at somebody's house, and you could tell that the couple just had a fight. There's like some tension in the air and has nothing to do with you. So it was like that. But there have been more things like that where somebody is angry. Now they're making some efforts to reach out to a person of color or a woman, and they get declined. But look, now they're being like inclusive and progressive, and they're stepping out of their comfort zone. I think that as we are trying to connect with one another and people do clumsy things, those of us that are historically underrepresented will have to figure out what our updated new strategies are now in this strange new universe that we find ourselves, and checking in with our reserves, our mental energy. I try to have grace whenever I can. I try not to trash talk. I try to give an opportunity for this to have a good resolution while protecting my dignity and doing the right thing and walking away if I need to. And I have felt more pressure to do that now that I'm a director of an academy with composers that are more vulnerable. If I'm speaking on their behalf, how can I champion what is fair and right for them? I think it's an unending question. It's going to come to us in so many different shapes for our entire lives. That magical arrival when we never have to stop thinking with strategy in our mind, I don't think we'll ever get here in our lifetime. But it's such a worthy mission. It's such a worthy cause that's what keeps me going. It's not wasted energy.
It won't be. And I was just reminded I was recently offered a position while being lectured the entire time during negotiation that I should have been grateful for being even offered the position, that I shouldn't even negotiate, because with other organizations, I wouldn't even get an offer. Or I just found out I'm a finalist for a really prestigious position, and out of the 8 finalists, I'm the only woman. And I was like, really? In 2022, I'm honored, but can you just not find another woman like me qualified to be your finalist?
This thing of gratitude is really interesting. So yes, as human beings, the general state of being human is to expect gratitude, is to be grateful to be alive, and we get to do music. So there's that. But when the expectation for our gratitude is weaponized against us so that we're not making trouble or asking for too much, then that's a very sad situation. And that's when we have to protect ourselves. When we're supposed to be grateful for less, or grateful, hey, don't expect too much. You're a pioneer. You just pushed the cause ahead for all women. So just be grateful that we're paying you 10% of what we'll pay a man, better than zero. And you have to approach that with the dignity as a member of a human race and saying, this is what I'm worth, or I'm not going to do all of this work. I'll do this amount of work, or recognizing, you just showed grace to me by saying there should have been other women among the 8. Yes, you're probably right. There probably should have been other women among the 8. But the fact that you were there and represented through your presence and through your gifts it is progress. It's important to do. We just need to be careful with the state of gratitude that is litigated by others and demanded by others from us.
Totally. And as you said, you are now the director of the academy. Is that part of the challenges that you didn't expect coming, or as it's the new things that as the academy grow? I knew you started in 2016 in your own house, and now it has grown to a full program with a lot of different guests, different performances, and all that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I started with a very small scenario that remains at the core of what we do, which is simply giving my composers the opportunity to write a piece of music free of judgment, except for making it more you. Whatever you want to do, we're not going to try and make it more another style or more like what the performers like. We want to make it more you and then give you all the wisdom that the performers have, like what does work on a violin, what does work on a piano. And then my job is, what do you want to say over your life? How can this one piece of music be one of 200 pieces of music that you're going to write? And make this beautiful jigsaw puzzle piece that is your artistic work list, or your document, your testimony as a witness of these interesting, tumultuous years that we're living in. So it was really, really just very basic, but I try to get it very high quality right from the beginning. The composers would come to Boonville, where I live now, and it's still out of my house. That's our main physical space. We don't have a separate music academy building. We just do it right here. The composers raid my refrigerator. We work in my living room. Now I have two houses. I bought another house to make space for this, and we fixed it up. We're looking at building other little structures little by little. And then it grew because I realized that my composers needed more than a pass-through experience. And I had always been disappointed with schools where people just pass through and the degree is supposed to help them, but the school doesn't invest any more in them. They don't help really get them jobs. So we started building out other programs. We even have a mental wellness program that we're starting to build because one of my composers became a therapist and a social worker and is licensed to be able to lead wellness seminars across state lines like that. Other composers, many of them were able to get paying commissions for, and then we get them continued mentorship, other opportunities to take master classes. They can just ask very basic questions about, does this work on the marimba? And we can host marimba classes, so they don't feel like that they have to learn everything on the job. And then fundraising has been a big part of it, which is always a little scary to do. Can you make this work? And we got lucky. We got people to help us out, as well as a big Mellon grant that really put us in a good financial shape. And I leveraged my career into it, meaning that with the connections that I've made professionally, I've been able to bring in good performers or get good commissions for my composers. And they're going to go farther. I mean, they already are. They're going farther than me. And that's the nature of succeeding generations. They're supposed to accomplish more, go farther, and continue to change this world. And that's my hope for them.
That's all we can hope for. Let's keep the next generation kids going further and make more changes, positive changes, and we spread the love.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to wrap up our conversation, what are some things that you learned along the way, both as the entrepreneur in a sense that you are directing the academy and also as an artist, a creative creator, some things that you learned that you can share with my audience, or something that is so, can I curse, so shitty that you want them to be looked out for?
Oh, I mean, I think creativity shows the best of humans. And when you look at happy societies, settled societies, they're in a place where they can tell stories and they can make beautiful things and they have time to enjoy these beautiful things. And the problem solving and the team spirit and just the gifting. When I create a piece of music, it's like I cooked a wonderful meal at my house and was presented in concert. It's like the people are coming over and it's this shared experience. And for that to be ritualized into a concert hall, into a program, a season subscription, it's just wonderful that as a civilization, we can have those kinds of offerings. And I think that what artists do is extremely, extremely important, but we have to advocate for ourselves. And I would really encourage people to look at the current music industry and academia as two very powerful middlemen between the artist and the world. They're two very powerful middlemen, but they're not the only determinants of how your music making can reach the world. You will probably do a lot of it in those two arenas. And even if you do all of it, just knowing that you're trying to access the world and this is just a channel, maybe that will change your perspective on your music making a little bit. It could be a really good thought exercise, for instance, and maybe it goes beyond a thought exercise, is to ask yourself, if money were not a concern, what would I do? I know I'm going to be able to, what would I do? If I know I have a nice orchestra to conduct, or I can write these pieces of music, what would I write? What changes would I love to see happen? And just dare to dream for a day, a few days, weeks, months. Just put energy into that. And when they start becoming a little bit more real to you in your imagination, what can you do to take steps or grab at some of that energy or some of those goals in your life here and now? If I hadn't done that, I would not have started my academy. I would be a professor at a conservatory somewhere and trying to make it work within their curriculum and being very frustrated. But at my academy, I can do all the practicums I want. I can commission all I want. I can teach a class on hip hop. I can, there's just so much that I can do. And I can help fund programs to send my composers abroad. And this is not to say that I wouldn't engage in a job at a professorship, but now I know what I want. So that when I do go back into the middleman, I can try and bring in some of that wonderful, non-typical, or even quietly rebellious way of thinking. And I get praise for it. That's the funny thing, is that then people are not afraid of it. So you may actually advance your cause more quickly within the mainstream by doing some non-mainstream thinking. And that's what I would encourage people to do. Artists are supposed to be imaginative anyway. Imagination is supposed to be our strongest suit. So you may have to promise yourself 1 hour, 3 times a week. You do nothing but imagine the impossible. Well, I think that's our duty, is to do that.
That is lovely. I'm going to try that with my score study. Because for some standard repertoire I grew up with, I sometimes felt I was so stuck from what I was taught to do, and I couldn't see new colors. But as you say, sometimes just looking from a different perspective and use your imagination. That's the most wonderful gift we have as human beings.
That's the height of being alive. I really think so.
Gabriela, so thank you so much for all you have shared, and we'll put that in the show notes. Can you tell my listeners where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally or with your academy?
I would just look us up. The academy is the Gabriela Lena Frank Creative Academy of Music, or GLFCAM, glfcam.com. Everything we do is there. You can reach us. There's a contact form there, and lots of videos that we put up on YouTube. We're constantly turning out new material. We're probably going to update the website with a lot of new stuff over this fall. And yeah, that's where you can find us. And I've got a bunch of new things coming this season. The pandemic backlogged a lot of stuff, so everything's coming out now. a new opera, Requiem being recorded, turning my symphony for Philadelphia Orchestra, wrap up my residency there. Yeah, I'm not hard to find, and my academy's not hard to find.
And reach out to volunteer if you're in the area.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So here you are, my friend, and I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. I had great fun speaking with Gabriela, and don't worry if you were listening at the gym or in the car. Well, I always do. I always listen to podcasts while I was driving. We will have all the information in the show notes. You can just go to chaowenting.com, and all the information is right there if you want to click and find out some programs that you can support. And I absolutely love what Gabriela said about forming your support system and your community even before you might get frustrated. And I think frustration is a part of the package, right? Not just as a conductor, as a musician, as an artist, but it's part of life. Life is not a straight line. There are ups and downs, and we make progress and we don't make progress. You know, some days are better than the others and some days are worse than the others. And that's just the way life is. But don't get stuck by some really malicious and vicious comments. If they are, sometimes even personal attack, don't listen to them. I recently read something that I found really powerful. Don't listen to yourself, talk to yourself. So I started talking to myself while I'm driving that I'm a talented conductor. I have a lot of great things to offer. I bring great joy, and I cared about my colleagues and my musicians and people that I work with. And I tell myself every day when I remember that it's going to be a great day. I think that's talking into yourself with all the positive attitude is really such a great thing. And that's why I would encourage you to do the same. Just repeat with me. I am a talented person and I am serving a great purpose by whatever filling the blank, by helping out others working with me, by helping out the next generation, by being a role model for the young girls and or young women identifying generation, or by just being a caring person in working community, anything, find some affirmation that is going to be great talk into your mind instead of you listening to yourself. Oh, that was bad. Oh, why are you doing that? You're not even great, right? We've all heard ourselves talking negativities into our minds. So this is what I have for you for September, and I can't believe that the Conductor's podcast is almost a year old. We started in October 2021, and I am so grateful for all of you for joining me in this journey, and I'll see you next week at the same time and place. Bye for now.